Alright, so I've just finished playing every mainline Sniper Ghost Warrior game, from the very first one all the way through to Contracts 2, and honestly, this series has had one of the most inconsistent journeys I've ever seen in a shooter franchise. At its best, it delivers some genuine satisfying long-range sniping. At its worst, it feels half-finished, confused about what it wants to be, and sometimes outright frustrating to play. So, let's break it all down, game by game. So jumping into the first game, Sniper Ghost Warrior, which was released back in 2010, takes place in a fictional Latin America island nation that's been taken over by a hostile military regime. You play as Tyler Wells, a US Marine Corps sniper sent in as part of a covert operation to destabilise the regime, assassinate key targets and support rebel forces trying to overthrow the government. The story itself is very much a backdrop rather than a focus. Missions are structured around taking out high value targets, stealing intel and sabotaging enemy infrastructure, and slowly weakening the enemy's control of the island. There's talk of corruption, military coups and guerrilla warfare, but it's all delivered in a very surface level way, through briefings and radio chatter. There's no real emotional hook here, no memorable characters and no twists that stand out. You're basically a generic military sniper guy doing missions in a jungle, and narrative exists purely to push you from one level to the next. It does the job, but it's not something you're ever really invested in, even when playing it. So the first thing you're going to notice when you play this game is the graphics, and visually the game is fine, just fine. Some areas actually look pretty nice, especially when the lighting hits right, such as sun cutting through the trees. In isolation you can see what they're going for, but the moment you compare it to games that came out at a similar time, such as Halo Reach or Call of Duty Black Ops, it's not even close. Those games look cleaner, sharper, more detailed and far more polished. The environments here feel muddy and flat by comparison, and while the jungle setting works initially, it becomes visually boring very quickly. Everything starts to blend together, which is ironic given how much of the gameplay relies on spotting enemies at long range. And the rain effect, genuinely, it is awful. When it runs down the screen, it's distracting, ugly, and makes it almost impossible to see. It's one of those effects that actively makes the game worse. But look, it's an old game, so let's look at the core gameplay. The sniping mechanics are one of the areas where the game is somewhat competent. On hard difficulty, you actually have to judge wind speed and distance, which is how the game is clearly meant to be played. On normal and easy, you get a little red dot showing exactly where the bullet will land, which completely removes any sense of skill or satisfaction. When sniping from a distance, lining up shots and picking off isolated enemies, the game can feel okay. Not great, but okay. The problem is everything else outside of the sniping is genuinely terrible. Anytime the game forces you into close combat, it completely falls apart. There's a mission where you have to attack a village with an M4 and a pistol, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this is one of the worst gunplay experiences I've ever had. The M4 is so much bloom that it's borderline unusable. It's actually easier and more effective to use the pistol instead. And on hard difficulty, enemies have laser accurate aim. They'll pre-fire corners so it even peaks them, deleting you almost instantly. So in summary, you've got a decent sniping experience, awful weapon handling, extreme bloom, and hyper-accurate enemies. It's pretty miserable. The AI in the game as well is shockingly bad. Apart from the laser aim, you can shoot guards that are standing next to each other. The remaining one just stands there, looking around, waiting for you to shoot him next. Alarms only seem to trigger when enemies are already shooting back at you, which completely defeats the purpose of stealth or detection systems. Enemies don't react naturally to sound, movement, or missing squad mates. It feels like they exist in a vacuum. They also blend into the environment horribly. Between similar colour palettes and poor contrast, it's often hard to tell where enemies actually are, until you're being shot at, that is. Now the game tries to push a stealth mechanic and tries to encourage it, but there's just absolutely no reason to engage with it. There's no visibility meter, no sound indicator, no feedback at all to tell you if you're hidden or exposed. You can be hiding in thick bushes only to get spotted instantly, but then crouch in a shallow ditch and enemies just walk straight past you without noticing. Even worse, stealth is completely unnecessary. You can sit in one spot with the loudest sniper in the game, pick off enemies one by one, and they'll never figure out where you are. It's not stealth, it's just broken detection. One of the features they really push in this game is bullet time, and it's constantly present, but it feels cheap, like a first-person knockoff of Sniper Elite. doesn't add much, doesn't feel impactful, and doesn't meaningfully change the way you play. There's also a mission where you defend yourself with a 50 cal machine gun, which somehow manages to be the loudest gun on the game, paired with the weirdest cooldown mechanics imaginable, and just deeply unsatisfying to use. It just feels completely out of place in this game. Ironically, the throwing knife ends up being the best weapon in the entire game. It's silent, reliable, far more effective than most firearms, with it one-shotting most enemies. Now, looking at the kind of level design of this game, early on the maps are actually seem quite promising. Large jungle areas with multiple vantage points and different angles for shots, it gives the impression of some kind of freedom. But that quickly fades. The scenery just never changes. It's jungle after jungle after jungle. No city environments, no industrial areas, no real variation. Everything starts to feel very samey, very fast. There's one mission where you have to run away from stealing some intel, and it's one of the most frustrating missions I think I've ever played on any video game. On hard difficulty, it's almost impossible to complete this as intended. I eventually had to look up a YouTube video just to cheese it and move on. The final mission is also a massive letdown. You're required to take one of the longest shots in the game, which sounds cool, but honestly, outside of that actual shot, which is over in seconds, it's incredibly easy and completely underwhelming as an ending. Now, this game came out when quick saves were still a thing, and it also introduced checkpoints as well, and they're pretty generous, the checkpoints and quick saves. You're gonna need a lot, and I'm being honest with that, because even on hard, like I say, when you're getting laser beamed by them enemies, you're gonna be wanting to quick save that thing as much as possible. The entire game, it only took me around 5 to 6 hours to complete, and by the end I was genuinely forcing myself to keep going. I was very close to just dropping it entirely, but I wanted to finish it so I could give it a fair review. There's a few things to go back for, such as collecting intel, but ultimately, once you finish the game on hard, there's no replayability here. So coming back to this game, now it is honestly shocking. I remember playing it when it first came out and thinking, this was great. It felt almost a little bit groundbreaking in a way, but revisiting it today, it's clear that nostalgia is doing a lot of heavy lifting for the people leaving positive reviews, including probably myself before I played it again. The Steam reviews are currently sat at mixed, and honestly that makes complete sense. I'm surprised it's not lower. This game feels half-built. It doesn't feel like a full commitment to being a sniper simulator, and it absolutely fails on being a Call of Duty style shooter. It tries to be both and ultimately ends up being neither. I honestly don't think I'll ever play this game again, and genuinely can't believe I ever thought it was good. Okay, so moving on to Sniper Ghost Warrior 2, which came out in 2013, so 3 years later than the first game, and this definitely tries harder when it comes to things such as story. It's still not amazing, but it's noticeably better than the first game. You once again play as an elite sniper working on covert military operations, but this time the game places much more emphasis on the relationship between you and your spotter Maddox. The missions spanning multiple locations and focus on dismantling enemy operations, assassinating high-value targets, and supporting allied forces in the shadows. The story leans heavily into that sniper brotherhood angle, trust, teamwork, and relying on your spotter in hostile territory. There are more moments where the narrative almost works, especially when things start to go wrong and you're left exposed or forced to adapt. That said, while the overall story is stronger, the writing is still pretty rough. Some of the dialogue is genuinely painful. Cheesy one-liners completely undercut any tension the game is trying to build. Lines like this one,
"Couldn't or couldn't? Doesn't look like your aim improved. Try holding your rifle and not your dick,"
are meant to sound a bit gritty and edgy, but instead they just pull you right out of the experience. And that final line about his rifle being his best friend, yeah, that one sticks around for all the wrong reasons. Still, compared to the first game, there is an actual narrative thread here, even if it's not told particularly well. Gameplay wise, straight away, Sniper Ghost Warriors 2 feels more confident in what it's trying to do. This time it fully commits to being that stealth-focused sniper game, and that alone makes a huge difference. They clearly learned the mistakes from the first game, no more forcing to in that awful close quarters assault rifle combat. Every mission is now sniper rifle and pistol only, and honestly, that's for the best. The core loop is now about positioning, patience, and picking your shots, which is exactly what the series should have been about from the start. Now, one of the biggest improvements is the addition of a stealth activation meter. You can finally see when your enemy has line of sight of you, which makes movement and positioning feel far less random. However, stealth is still pretty broken. You can full sprint directly behind enemies and they won't hear you at all. Footstep noise, awareness and reaction times still feel off. So while the system looks better on paper, it's still very easy to exploit. There's improvement here, but it's still just not fully baked. As for another thing that's an improvement, that's the gun models. They're a big step up. Weapons actually look pretty good now, with better detail and more realistic proportions. Sniping itself feels solid, but judging distances can feel weirdly inconsistent. Depending on which rifle you're using, even in the shooting range, the game doesn't properly tell you how you're meant to calculate the distance. It kind of just expects you to figure it out. Weapon variety is also very limited. There are only around 4 snipers in total, which makes progression feel a bit flat. You don't really get that excitement of locking something genuinely new, and when you're forced to play with a sniper and pistol only, the fact that you only have that limited choice of weapons, it really hinders the game. There was also moments when I was playing this where bullets just seemed to go straight through enemies, which is never a great feeling on a precision-based game. And for the visuals, the game has definitely took a step forward. There's things such as when you move through the bush now, or some kind of plants or flowers, they actually move and go with your body, which is really cool to see. There's also the strong aspect of the lighting, where some environments actually look really, really good when the lighting works in its favour. Overall, graphics are better than the first game, but they still feel like they're missing that final layer of polish. Character models, animations and environments are improved, but not enough to really stand out from the time it was released. Considering games like The Last of Us Part 1 came out at this point, like, you compare that to this game and it's still just nowhere near it. Now, of course, this wouldn't be a Sniper Ghost Warrior game if you didn't encounter technical issues and glitches, which are still a big problem. I ran into a couple on my playthrough here. I got a glitch in Act 1 that forced me to fully restart the level. Just could not get past it. It ended up glitching me through the ground. A sound bug during a couple of the missions where you had to destroy the air guns or anything where there was fire in general. It kind of played around with the sound. There was also one where I had to storm a building and it just completely lost all sound whatsoever, apart from the occasional bit of music. The only way to fix this was to restart my game, pick a different chapter, quit that immediately, and then go back into the chapter that I was playing, which is a real faff around. I also had a glitch where the cutscene bugged out and I was getting shot during it where I couldn't react. I almost died during it. I just had to completely restart it, which then the enemy was not aware that was there. And yeah, it's just so weird, and it's things that I shouldn't have to be dealing with in the first place. And then finally, there's a lot of screen shaking, especially when you're running around with your pistol. It can genuinely make you feel sick after a while. Now, mission variety is better than the first game here, and level design feels more focused, but it also feels more linear. Ironically, while the first game had bigger maps, it felt more open. Here, everything is clearly funneled forward. There are fewer alternate routes and fewer creative angles, just less freedom overall. The lack of quest markers can also make things confusing at times. Your spotter will occasionally call out the enemies that you have to kill, but half the time it's genuinely hard to figure out who's talking about and where they even are. And also, once again, the final mission is pretty much a disappointment. Although it's a little bit more difficult now, ultimately the end fight is a one-on-one versus Maddox. And unless you know exactly where he spawns, you can spend, and I'm not joking, hours looking around the map trying to guess where he is, because there is so many options that you think he's going to pop from. And ultimately, it's not the one that you think it is, so unless you know where he's going to be, it's just, yeah, absolute potluck and can take you forever to figure it out. And once you find him, it's simply just one shot and he's dead. You know, it's no drawn out battle. It's just literally a game of hide and seek. It's, yeah, not difficult. It's just, once again, just poorly communicated. Again, I played this on the hardest difficulty and it took me around 7 hours to complete. It's more manageable than the first game, less frustrating overall and feels more consistent, but it still has its moments that just feel unfair and broken rather than actually challenging. Now, whereas I'd played Sniper Ghost Warrior 1, Sniper Ghost Warrior 2 I don't think I ever played, and if I did, I can't really remember it. But overall, it's a big improvement on the first game, there's no question about that. It finally understands that it should be a stealth sniper game, and when it sticks that formula, it can be pretty enjoyable. That said, it's still far from great. Technical issues, weak writing, limited weapon variety and broken stealth mechanics, and overall just the linear levels all hold it back. It's a decent game, not a bad one, but again it just doesn't feel like it's reaching its full potential. Compared to the first game, this feels like a step in the right direction, but just not a big enough one. Alright, so let's move on to Sniper Ghost Warrior 3, which came out in 2017. And this moves the series into a much larger, more ambitious setup, at least on paper. This time the game is set in a fictional Eastern European conflict zone inspired by Georgia, following John North, a sniper operating behind enemy lines. The story revolves around covert military operations again, regional instability, and John's personal mission to track down his missing brother. And honestly, the story just doesn't really land. It's a lot better than probably the first and second, but still is just not great. It tries to be more personal than previous games, but the writing and delivery completely undermine it. From early on, it's painfully obvious where the story is going. The whole "my brother might be involved" angle is so telegraphed that you can see the twist is coming from absolute miles away, and it ends up feeling almost identical to Sniper Ghost Warrior 2's Spotter Betrayal. Cutscenes and voice acting are still very bad, flat delivery, awkward dialogue and zero emotional weight. I found myself just tuning out of the cutscenes entirely and just waiting for Control to be handed back. Even when the game tries to explain its motivations or raise stakes, it just doesn't stick, and I found myself struggling to feel bothered. By the time you reach the end, the story hasn't earned its conclusion at all. The final mission is a massive disappointment. No insane long-range snipe, no big payoff, just a weak ending capped off with a terrible cutscene. But look, it's been 4 years since the last game, and this one is on the CryEngine, which is a pretty decent engine. This is easily the biggest improvement in the series in terms of visuals and graphics. Visually, Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 looks miles better than the first two games. Everything feels more refined, cleaner and more modern, and honestly it still holds up pretty well today. Environments look cool and good, weapons look great, and there's a noticeable jump in texture quality, lighting and just the overall polish of the game. For the first time in the series, the game actually looks like it belongs in its generation. Weapon models in particular are really strong, detailed, realistic and satisfying to look at, especially when you're scoped in. There's a big shift from the first two games here as well, with it going completely open world, and initially it does look like a huge step forward. You now have main missions, side missions, some more collectibles and even optional objectives. You can approach missions pretty much however you want, different routes, different vantage points and different tactics. On paper it's exactly what a sniper game should be. In practice, the world just feels completely dead and empty. There's no meaningful enemy patrols, no dynamic encounters, and very little happening between objectives. There's no AI anywhere. It's open world in structure, but not in spirit. You spend a lot of time travelling through large spaces with just nothing happening. They've even introduced outposts, which can be cleared, but enemies just seem to respawn there, and it just makes them feel pointless. You get nothing from doing them. It ends up feeling like a mishmash of ideas again, taken from other open world shooters such as Far Cry, especially, but it just lacks its depth or execution to make it work. It feels like a really poor version of probably something like Far Cry 2 if I'm being honest. But look, it's not all bad with this game. Once again, this is much more like the Sniper Ghost Warrior that we expect of today. The sniping just feels, well, fantastic. It's easily the best it's ever been in the series. Shots feel weighty, satisfying and rewarding. The addition of a rangefinder and scope adjustment is just a huge improvement. Judging distance finally makes sense, and managing long range shots feels far more deliberate rather than just guesswork. Suppressors even now wear out and need repairing, which is genuinely quite a cool mechanic that adds a bit of planning and realism. And it doesn't just wear out on your sniper as well, it's on your pistols and even ARs where you fire them a lot. If you fire them automatic, it's going to wear out a lot quicker than if you did it in semi-auto. You even get to choose your own loadout now with a decent selection of snipers, sidearms. You even have attachments that you can throw onto your weapons, and you can even swap bits of your gear based on the mission type, such as bringing different grenades or, different attachments depending on what the mission offers. All really good additions, even if they do feel like features that other games had years earlier. So I decided to play this one on normal difficulty, mainly to test that casual experience. And honestly, it was a mistake. On normal, the leading dot makes the game incredibly easy to the point of boredom. It removes all skill from sniping and turns every encounter into a point and click. I ended almost every single mission with 100% accuracy because it's just almost impossible to miss. You absolutely would recommend this, playing it on the harder difficulties at a minimum. That's where the mechanic actually shines and where you get that kind of sense of a real sniping simulator. There's also been further improvements to the stealth section. There's now a noise indicator on the map showing how loud your footsteps are, traditional detection arrows, and better feedback overall from it. It's not perfect, but it's clearly moved in the right direction. The drone is also a nice addition, but it feels weirdly heavy and awkward to control. Useful, but not particularly fun to use. A skill tree has also been added, but it's pretty underwhelming. Nothing game changing, no interesting builds, and no meaningful specializations. It exists, but it just doesn't add much to the game whatsoever. You could easily complete this without unlocking a single skill. Close quarters combat is also back in this game, and this time it actually worked pretty well. Assault rifles are viable, gunplay feels tighter, and you're no longer punished for being forced into close fights like in the first game. It gives you that option of, instead of sitting back and sniping or trying to go through stealthily, you can now pull out your M4 and just charge straight on with a couple of grenades and just do it on the old-fashioned loud way. They've also included a vehicle to get around the map, but honestly it's absolutely awful. It feels slow, clunky, and just ultimately painful to use. Given how big the world is, this just makes the travel worse. You're almost quicker just running it the entire way. Now, unfortunately, with the moving engine and just the complete change in overalls of it being visually a lot better, I did get some bad performance from this. I had very, very long load times in between maps because you do have different areas of the world that you can travel. And I got frequent stuttering and what felt like dropped frames, considering my rig is pretty decent and, well, more than decent, it's pretty damn good. And especially for a game this old, it was easily managing to hit out over like 200 FPS. Maybe that could have been an issue because I was getting such a high FPS in the game. I have had that in previous older games, but it's never felt as bad as what it's felt in this. It just didn't feel optimized at all, which is frustrating given how good the game can actually look at times. Now, in terms of length, on the normal difficulty, the game took me around about 8 hours to complete. It's not terrible, but considering the open world setup, it feels short, especially when the ending is just so weak. I suppose you could get more hours out of it if you really did grind out everything. I mainly stuck to the main missions and didn't really touch the side quests, but I suppose if you did all that, then maybe you could squeeze around 20 hours out of it, but that would really be pushing it. But look, overall, Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 is a decent game. The sniping is genuinely satisfying, probably the best it's ever been, and visually it's a huge step forward in the series. But the open world just feels empty. The story is predictable and uninteresting. Performance issues are constant and the game never fully commits to any one idea. It's a mashup of Far Cry style open world design and sniper gameplay that almost works but never quite comes together. For me, it lands at probably a 5 or a 6 out of 10. And funnily enough, it's probably, after playing all the games, and this is probably jumping in a little bit, it's probably either the best game out of the series, or at least ties it with maybe the second game, which kind of says everything about this game. It's fun to snipe in, but not much else. Now moving on to Sniper Ghost Warrior Contracts, which came out in 2019, and here it doesn't even pretend to have a traditional story. You play as a contract sniper where the entire game is framed around these contracts with brief narrative context explaining who the target is and why they need them to be eliminated. There is technically a story, especially towards the end where the game tries to explain why you did what you did and how these missions are connected, but it very much feels like an afterthought. There's no emotional investment, no memorable characters again, and nothing that really puts you through the game narrative. You play as basically, once again, generic sniper guy. It's functional, it exists, and that's about it. This game is just not for you if you're wanting to play it for the story, and it doesn't even try very hard to convince you to play it for a story either. Now, one of the first things you're going to notice about this game is the movement and just general feel of it. It feels a lot faster and lighter in terms of controlling your character. Movement is very much like a Crysis-like game. You sprint very quickly and generally feel far more agile than you have in any previous Sniper Warrior game. It almost feels like you've gone from being a methodical military sniper, just a generic kind of guy with just his rifle, to a light armoured super soldier. It's not necessarily bad, but it just feels like another tonal shift in the series. Now look, visually the game looks pretty goddamn impressive. It still holds up today, definitely. The CryEngine is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here, and to be fair, the developers make good use of it. Lighting, shadows, environments and terrain all look pretty damn solid. The map themselves are also welled out pretty well for the most part. Sightlines make sense, vantage points are well placed, and environments are clearly designed with sniping in mind. But having a look at the graphics, you've got to remember what kind of games came out at this kind of time. I know Jedi Survivor came out at this point, and that game looked visually very, very good. And I'd argue that although this looks good, I wouldn't say it stands out from any of the rest that came out during its time. Now, going back to that kind of level design, this is where the game really changes direction. Instead of that full open world that we got in Ghost Warrior 3, Contracts goes for a semi-open sandbox style of game. Each level is contained in an area with multiple objectives and multiple targets. The idea is clearly inspired by almost like the Hitman series. Freedom on how you approach objectives, multiple routes and optional challenges, but it lacks depth, detail and systemically design that makes Hitman work. There is some freedom and exploration, but it's much more limited. It feels like, again, just a strict-backed version of both Hitman and Far Cry, borrowing ideas without fully committing to them. It just feels like it doesn't know what it is, this game. Now, one of the positive notes is that in the easier difficulties of this game, the precise red dot showing you exactly where the bullet will land is gone, which is great. Instead, you get a general wind direction indicator, which pushes you to actually learn the mechanics rather than just rely on assists. It's a good change and makes sniping feel more engaging across all difficulties. It's how it should be. Sniping itself is very enjoyable, and bullet cam and gore have massively been improved. Shots feel brutal and satisfying, which is clearly something the developers have leaned into this time. Unfortunately, whilst there has been some improvements here and there, one of the negatives has been the minimap. I don't know what they decided to do to this, but they've made it awful. It shows you very little useful detail and makes navigation harder than it needs to be. Objectives are also poorly communicated. It's often unclear which objective relates to what on the map, leading to confusion rather than challenge. Now, I don't know if this was a bug that I had, because it was working later on where I could click into the areas and it showed me what challenge relates to what area, but there was an instance where I just had to guess what was going on. There's also this extraction mechanic, which is just another strange design choice. It's meant to function like a quick save system, letting you extract once you've completed enough objectives, but just feels unnecessary and awkward. And your only way to progress through the game is to complete all of the contracts in the area, so again, it just feels a little bit weird that they wouldn't just auto save it once you completed one objective. Instead, you have to get to this extraction area, save it, and then continue. And it's not even like there's kind of any jeopardy there, because if you die during extraction or on your way to extraction, you can still load a checkpoint, which will almost have your saved progress there. The climbing system also returns from Ghost Warrior 3, which I didn't mention too much, purely because it's just very clunky. It works, but it feels like an afterthought rather than a core mechanic. Environmental hazards like the bouncing betties are genuinely awful. They're extremely hard to spot and almost impossible to safely defuse, and they end up feeling cheap rather than tense. You can see it with this new vision that you have, where you put this mask down and it kind of highlights everything that you can get in touch with. Again, this feels a little bit like a cheating mechanic, but it just feels a bit like an afterthought. Now, the length of the game, this is where that feeling of this game feeling more like DLC than an actual game kicks in. There are very few contracts, and because of that, the game can be completed in around 6 hours on normal difficulty. You can squeeze more time out of that by completing the optional side quests, replaying contracts and trying different approaches, but the replayability feels limited. It doesn't have the depth or the support of multiple playstyles in a meaningful way. It feels like this could have been an expansion or a standalone DLC rather than a fully priced mainline entry. My overall thoughts to this game is that it's pretty decent. It's okay. Sniping is very enjoyable. It's almost the best that it's been, I think. The bullet cam and gore are easily the best in the series by far, and the maps are generally well designed, look good, and are great for long range engagements. But there is basically no story. The UI is not the greatest it's been, the structure feels incomplete, and the whole package feels smaller than it should be. If you could pick it up for probably under a £5, it's probably definitely worth giving a game and trying it out. Just to kind of mess around with sniping and just kill some time overall, but anything more than that, it's very much hard to justify buying this game. For me, it probably lands, again, probably like a 6 out of 10. And now moving on to the final game in the series, which is Sniper Ghost Warrior Contracts 2, which came out in 2021. And just like the first Contracts game, Contracts 2 barely has a story. You're once again reliving a series of missions across different regions, eliminating targets for vague geopolitical reasons. There's no strong narrative thread trying to tie anything together, no memorable characters, and nothing that really pushes you forward other than ticking contracts off a list. If anything, it feels more stripped back than the first game. The story exists purely as an excuse for you to move around the map, and that's about it. And once again, you're playing generic Sniper Man. Now, in terms of the actual length of this game, on paper, the game is actually a bit longer to complete. I think it took me around 10 to 15 hours to complete this, but that extra length doesn't come from depth or variety. There again are only 6 regions, and once again it just feels like a DLC size experience. Honestly, if Contracts 1 and 2 had been merged into a single game, it probably would have felt like a complete product. As it stands, it still feels too small to justify being its own standalone title. Graphically, the game looks good, but again, it's almost identical to the first Contracts game. It's probably the best this game's ever looked, but like I say, it's not a massive stride forward. There's nothing here that feels like a real visual upgrade. It's the same engine, same lighting style, and same overall presentation. The biggest issue for me was the performance. There is constant stuttering again, frequent what felt like frame drops, and just overall really poor optimization. It generally feels like the game hasn't been rendered or optimized properly at all. Even when nothing is happening on screen, it can really struggle. The gameplay again is probably its core problem. I'm not exaggerating when I say it's basically just the exact same game as Contracts 1. It's the same movement, gameplay, gunplay, stealth mechanics, mission structure. If you've played the first Contracts game, you already know exactly how this game plays out. The only difference here is that they've added a new style of mission called the long shot missions. These involve taking sniper shots from over 1,000 meters, which is undeniably a cool idea and fits into that fantasy of being an elite long-range sniper. Unfortunately, the missions are pretty short. They're more of a gimmick than a fully developed section of the game. Once you've played them and done it, that's it. You've seen them all. Like, you're one and done. Nice idea, but again, it's just not enough to carry a full sequel. They've also made the very strange decision of including the red dot for aiming again on the easier difficulties. On hard difficulties, it is removed along with most of the HUD for the hardest mode in the game, which is good. But it's this inclusion of bringing back the red dot on the normal difficulties feels more like a step backwards after Contracts 1 deliberately moved away from that kind of hand-holding, and you lose that immersion of being, kind of a sniper simulator again. It just adds to that feeling that the series still doesn't quite know what it wants to be. Now, I'm not giving too much time to talk about this game, because like I say, it's just Ghost Warriors 1, but with a 2 after it. There's no real reason to dress this one up. It's, like I say, the exact same game, with just slightly different content here and there, one new gimmick and pretty much worse performance. That's it. I'd only buy this if you really enjoy Contracts 1 and just want to feel the exact same thing. It's, for me, probably a 4 out of 10 purely because of the fact that it just feels more like DLC than an actual standalone game. I feel like they're just trying to squeeze some money out of the series at this point. And yeah, it just feels just like a waste of time, to be honest. Now look, after going through the entire Sniper Ghost Warrior series, it's pretty clear that this franchise has had a very messy identity crisis right from the very start. The first game tried to be a hardcore sniping simulator whilst also wanting to have that Call of Duty style shooter for ARs, and it just failed at both. The sniping mechanics were pretty interesting for its time, but everything around them, the AI, stealth, gunplay and level design, was just straight up bad. Ghost Warriors 2 was the first real step in the right direction. It finally committed to being a stealth sniper game, improved visuals, added proper stealth indicators and had better level design. It wasn't great, but it proved that developers were learning and actually listening to feedback, moving this game forward and the series forward. But unfortunately, Snipers Ghost Warriors 3 came out. It was the most ambitious game of the series. The move to the open world added freedom, better progression and more satisfying sniping the franchise has ever seen to that point, but it also showed the studio's limits. Terrible performance, empty world design, weak story and a ton of half-baked ideas stopped it from ever being its full potential. It again moved away from that linear approach of being almost a stealth sniper game and added something else to it. It just changed its identity again. And then from all that, we then got the Contract games, which again was just a complete direction change. Contracts 1 stepped things back to smaller, more focused missions. The sniping itself was probably the best it's ever been in the series. The gore and the bullet cam were tuned up and technically it was a tighter experience. But it also felt small, forgettable and more budget Hitman / Far Cry clone than a proper Sniper Ghost Warriors sequel. Contracts 2 didn't really evolve that formula at all. Outside the long shot missions, it's basically the same game, with worse optimization and not enough ideas to justify a full release. It should have just been DLC, simple as that. Now looking at the series as a whole, the sniping mechanics are the one consistent strength in all these games. When the game lets you line up shots, account for distance, wind and timing, it absolutely nails that fantasy of being an elite sniper. But everything else, such as the story, the AI, stealth systems, progression and world design, has always felt either unfinished or just poorly thought out. That's why the series ends up sitting in this weird space where it's never been truly terrible, but they've never ever released a great game. For me, Sniper Ghost Warrior is a franchise full of good ideas that were never fully realised. Every game improves on something, but then at the same time breaks or removes something else. There's no definitive entry that you can point at and say, you know what, that's the one they nailed and that is the best game in the series by far. Now if you're curious about playing these games, personally I'd probably skip the first one, move straight on to Sniper Ghost Warrior 2 just so you can get a feel of how the game used to be. Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 is definitely a decent one to play as well. It probably has one of the best sniping mechanics in the game, and personally I'd only touch Contracts if that's something that you really want to get into, where you're just playing linear contract missions. They are okay, but probably stay away from Contracts 2 and just play Contracts 1. At the end of the day, this is a series that's always been chasing greatness, but never quite catching it. Now if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.